The sound of a palm striking flesh echoed through the Jefferson County courthouse like a gunshot. In that single moment, captured by dozens of phones, witnessed by a packed courtroom officer, Travis Brantley's hand connected with Judge Malcolm Varelli's face, and everything changed. The slap that would end a career, expose decades of corruption, and transform an entire city began with one man's inability to accept that a black judge now held authority over him. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment below which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of justice travels. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Jefferson County courthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors that had witnessed over a century of justice and injustice. Judge Malcolm Varelli stood in his chambers, adjusting his robes with the same precision he brought to every aspect of his life. At 52, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had fought for every achievement, never taking for granted the weight of the gavel he was about to wield. "Your Honor." His clerk, Sarah Chen, knocked softly before entering. "The courtroom is packed. Standing room only." Malcolm nodded, unsurprised. The case of Jamal Thompson had attracted attention from the moment the 17-year-old honors student was arrested 6 weeks ago. What should have been a routine Tuesday had transformed into something else entirely when Officer Travis Brantley had slammed the teenager against his own car, claiming he looked suspicious while walking home from his job at the community center. "The media?" Malcolm asked, though he already knew the answer. "3 national outlets plus all the locals. The ACLU sent observers. There are also—" Sarah hesitated. "There are FBI agents in the gallery, Your Honor. They didn't announce themselves, but security recognized them." This gave Malcolm pause. He set down the case file he'd been reviewing. He'd already memorized every word anyway. "FBI. For a simple assault case." "That's what I thought too." Sarah lowered her voice. "Judge, there's something else. Officer Brantley, he's been running his mouth in the hallway, making comments about having to testify before a—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Before a black judge." Malcolm completed it for her, his tone remaining steady despite the familiar sting. It wasn't the first time, wouldn't be the last. Being the first black judge in Jefferson County's history meant carrying not just the weight of the law, but the burden of representation. Every decision he made would be scrutinized through a lens that his white predecessors never had to consider. "Your Honor." Sarah's expression tightened with concern. "Maybe we should request additional security." Malcolm shook his head. "That would only escalate tensions. We proceed as normal." "The law doesn't bend to intimidation, Sarah. Not in my courtroom." As he walked toward the courtroom, Malcolm's mind drifted to the journey that had brought him here. Growing up in Jefferson County's East End, the part of town where police sirens were more common than ice cream trucks, he'd witnessed firsthand how justice could be twisted, delayed, or simply denied based on the color of one's skin. His father, a mechanic who'd built his shop from nothing, had taught him that dignity wasn't something anyone could take from you. It was something you carried within. "You can't control how they see you," his father had said, hands stained with motor oil but spirit unbowed. "But you can control who you are." Those words had carried Malcolm through law school, through years as a public defender, watching the system chew up young black men and spit them out through his eventual appointment to the bench, an appointment that had sparked both celebration and controversy in equal measure. The courtroom doors swung open before him, and the buzz of conversation died instantly. Every eye tracked his movement as he ascended to the bench. In the packed gallery, he recognized faces both friendly and hostile. Reverend James Morrison from the First Baptist Church sat in the 3rd row, having organized peaceful protests since Jamal's arrest. Behind him, a group of Jamal's classmates wore matching t-shirts bearing his honor roll photo. On the other side of the aisle, a cluster of off-duty police officers sat with arms crossed, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly contemptuous. "All rise," the bailiff announced, though most were already standing. Malcolm settled into his chair, the elevated position providing him a clear view of the battlefield his courtroom was about to become. At the prosecution table, District Attorney Helen Crawford shuffled papers with the nervous energy of someone who knew this case was a powder keg. She'd been in office for 15 years, carefully navigating the politics of Jefferson County, never pushing too hard in any direction. At the defense table sat Marcus Williams, a young black attorney who'd graduated top of his class from Howard Law and returned to Jefferson County with a mission. Beside him, Jamal Thompson sat rigid in his pressed suit. His mother had probably spent her last dollars ensuring he looked respectable for court, as if respectability had protected him from being thrown to the ground 6 weeks ago. "Be seated," Malcolm commanded, his voice carrying the authority he'd learned to project. "We are here for the matter of the state versus Jamal Thompson. Before we begin, I want to make something clear to everyone in this courtroom. This is a hall of justice. I will not tolerate outburst disruptions or any behavior that interferes with these proceedings. The gallery will remain silent unless called upon. Am I understood?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Helen Crawford stood. "Your Honor, the prosecution is ready to proceed." "The defense is ready, Your Honor." Marcus Williams added, his voice steady, but his eyes burning with barely contained intensity. "Very well. Ms. Crawford, call your first witness." The prosecutor cleared her throat. "The state calls Officer Travis Brantley." The side door opened, and Travis Brantley swaggered in like he owned the place. At 38, he'd been on the force for 14 years, every one of them spent patrolling the East End with what he called proactive policing, and what residents called harassment. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished to a mirror, his jaw set with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. As Brantley took the oath, his eyes locked briefly with Malcolm's, and something passed between them. Not respect, not even acknowledgement of authority, but something closer to challenge. Malcolm had seen that look before in the eyes of officers who couldn't reconcile their worldview with a black man in robes. "Officer Brantley." Helen Crawford began, her voice carefully neutral. "Please tell the court about the events of September 15th. Brantley shifted in the witness chair, his hands clasped in front of him in a practiced pose of professionalism. "I was on routine patrol in the East End, approximately 9:30 p.m. I observed the defendant walking in what I considered a suspicious manner." "Can you elaborate on what you mean by suspicious manner?" Crawford asked, though she looked like she immediately regretted the question. "He was walking slowly, looking around, hands in his pockets." Brantley replied, his tone suggesting these were obvious signs of criminal intent. "In my experience, that's often indicative of someone casing for criminal opportunity." From the defense table, Marcus Williams barely suppressed a scoff. Malcolm noticed several people in the gallery shifting uncomfortably. Walking while black, the unspoken crime that had led to so many encounters like this. "What happened next?" Crawford continued. "I initiated a stop to investigate. I asked the defendant to remove his hands from his pockets and identify himself." "And did he comply?" Brantley's jaw tightened slightly. "He asked why I was stopping him. He became argumentative." "Objection, Your Honor." Marcus Williams stood. "Characterization. Asking why one is being stopped is not argumentative. It's a constitutional right." "Sustained," Malcolm ruled. "Officer Brantley, please stick to the facts of what was said and done, not your interpretation." Brantley's eyes flashed with annoyance. "He asked why I was stopping him, multiple times." "Then what occurred?" Crawford pressed on, clearly wanting to get through this as quickly as possible. "I informed him that I was conducting an investigation and required his identification. He continued to question my authority." Malcolm noticed Brantley's language, clinical, detached, the kind of police speak designed to drain humanity from an encounter. Not, "I talked to Jamal," but "I informed the defendant." Not, "He asked questions," but "He questioned my authority." "Officer Brantley," Crawford continued, "what happened that led to the physical altercation?" "The defendant made a sudden movement," Brantley stated flatly. "I perceived it as potentially threatening and took action to secure the scene." "What kind of sudden movement?" Malcolm interjected, exercising his right to question witnesses. The courtroom tensed at his direct involvement. Brantley looked up at him, and for a moment the mask slipped. "He pulled his phone out, Your Honor, quickly." "To call his mother," Marcus Williams said, just loud enough to be heard. "Mr. Williams," Malcolm warned gently, though he understood the frustration. "And this phone, you perceived it as a weapon?" Malcolm continued his questioning. In that moment, with his aggressive demeanor. "Objection." Marcus Williams was on his feet again. "There's been no evidence presented of any aggressive demeanor." Sustained. Officer Brantley, please refrain from characterizing the defendant's behavior without specific examples. Brantley's face was beginning to redden. "He was non-compliant, Your Honor. In my training and experience." "Your training taught you that a 17-year-old reaching for a phone constitutes a threat requiring physical force." Malcolm pressed his voice, remaining steady, despite the electricity building in the room. "Your Honor," Helen Crawford interjected, "perhaps we should allow the prosecution to continue its direct examination before—" "I'm exercising my discretion to ensure clarity in the testimony, Counselor," Malcolm replied smoothly. "Officer Brantley, please answer the question." Brantley straightened in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. "I followed proper protocol based on the totality of circumstances." "Which circumstances specifically? The time of night, the location, or the fact that a young black man was walking home from work?" The last question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. The gallery held its collective breath. Helen Crawford looked like she wanted to object, but couldn't find the grounds. Marcus Williams leaned forward slightly, sensing blood in the water. "I don't see race, Your Honor," Brantley replied, the words sounding rehearsed. "I see behavior." "I see." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Ms. Crawford, continue your examination." The prosecutor cleared her throat, shuffling her papers as if they might contain some magic spell to diffuse the tension. "Officer Brantley, were there any weapons found on Mr. Thompson?" "No weapons were recovered." "Any illegal substances?" "No." "Any stolen property?" "No." "What was Mr. Thompson doing when you encountered him?" Brantley shifted. "Walking." "Walking from where?" "I later learned he was coming from his job at the community center." "So to summarize," Malcolm interjected again, "you stopped a young man who was walking home from work, who had no weapons, no drugs, no stolen property, and whose only suspicious behavior was walking while black." "Excuse me, walking slowly with his hands in his pockets on a cool September evening." "Your Honor," Crawford finally objected. "That's argumentative and withdrawn," Malcolm conceded, though the point had been made. "Please continue, Counselor." But before Crawford could ask another question, Brantley leaned forward in the witness chair. "Your Honor, with all due respect, you weren't there. You don't know what it's like on those streets at night. We have to make split-second decisions." "I grew up on those streets, Officer Brantley." Malcolm interrupted his voice, carrying a weight that silenced the room. "3 blocks from where you arrested Mr. Thompson. So please don't presume to tell me what I don't know about my own community." The silence that followed was deafening. Brantley's face had gone from red to purple, his breathing audible even from the bench. In the gallery, phones were discreetly recording, though Malcolm had banned their use. He'd deal with that later. "Your Honor," Marcus Williams stood. "May I cross-examine the witness?" "In a moment. Mr. Williams, Officer Brantley, I want to understand something. In your 14 years on the force, how many arrests have you made?" Brantley blinked at the unexpected question. "I don't have an exact number. Approximately? Maybe 300, 350. "And what percentage of those arrests would you say were of black citizens?" Objection. Crawford was on her feet. Relevance. Goes to potential bias and pattern of behavior. Your Honor, Marcus Williams jumped in. I'll allow it, Malcolm ruled. Officer Brantley. I don't categorize my arrests by race. No, the department does. In fact, those statistics are public record. Malcolm pulled out a folder he'd kept beside him. According to departmental data of your 347 arrests in the past decade, 294 were of black citizens. That's nearly 85% in a county that's only 40% black. Can you explain that disparity? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Crawford looked mortified. In the gallery, the off-duty officers were shifting uncomfortably, while Reverend Morrison nodded slowly, as if a long-held suspicion had been confirmed. Those statistics don't tell the whole story. Brantley protested, his composure finally cracking. Crime rates in certain neighborhoods. Are you suggesting that black neighborhoods are inherently more criminal? Malcolm asked, his tone dangerously quiet. I'm saying that's where the crime is. Or is that simply where you choose to look for it? Marcus Williams muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Mr. Williams, you'll have your turn, Malcolm admonished, though his eyes remained fixed on Brantley. Officer, let me ask you this. In your arrest of Mr. Thompson, at what point did you identify yourself as a police officer? Brantley hesitated. I was in uniform. That's not what I asked. Did you verbally identify yourself and state the reason for the stop as required by department policy? The situation escalated quickly. Yes or no, Officer Brantley? No. Another murmur rippled through the gallery. Jamal Thompson's mother, Denise, sitting in the front row, gripped her purse tighter, tears streaming down her face. So a 17-year-old young man walking home from work at night is approached by someone who doesn't identify themselves as police, doesn't state a reason for stopping him, and when he reaches for his phone, presumably to call for help, you threw him to the ground. That's a mischaracterization. Brantley's voice rose, his professional demeanor evaporating. Then characterize it correctly for us, officer. Brantley's hands were now gripping the witness chair so tightly his knuckles were white. You're twisting everything you people always... He caught himself, but too late. The words "you people" hung in the air like a confession. Even Crawford winced. You people, Officer Brantley. Malcolm's voice was ice. Who exactly are you people? I meant criminals. People who don't respect law and order. I see. And in your view, does that include judges who ask uncomfortable questions? Your Honor. Crawford attempted to intervene. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. No recess, Malcolm declared. We're going to get to the truth today. Mr. Williams, your cross-examination. Marcus Williams rose slowly like a boxer who'd been waiting for his moment. He was 31 young by legal standards, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd been preparing for this fight his entire life. Officer Brantley. He began, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. You stated that Mr. Thompson was walking suspiciously. Can you demonstrate for the court what suspicious walking looks like? A nervous laugh rippled through the gallery before Malcolm silenced it with a look. That's ridiculous, Brantley spat. Is it? You based your decision to stop my client on his manner of walking. Surely you can show us what triggered your law enforcement instincts. Objection? Crawford said weakly. Counsel is badgering. Overruled. It's a fair question. Officer Brantley, can you or can you not demonstrate what you observed? Brantley glared at Marcus Williams with undisguised hatred. He was walking slowly, looking around. Like someone who lives in the neighborhood and knows people, Williams suggested. Mr. Thompson has lived on that street his entire life. He was 3 blocks from his home. Isn't it possible he was simply walking home, maybe tired from his shift at the community center where he mentors younger kids? I didn't know that at the time. No, you didn't, because you didn't ask. You didn't investigate. You saw a young black man and immediately assumed criminality. Williams moved closer to the witness stand. Tell me, Officer Brantley, in your report, you wrote that my client fit the description of a suspect. What suspect? What crime had been reported in that area that night? Brantley's silence spoke volumes. Let me help you. Williams continued pulling out his own folder. According to dispatch records, there were no BOLOs, no reported crimes, no suspicious person calls in that area that entire evening. So what description did my client fit exactly? It was a high-crime area, Brantley insisted. Was it? Let's look at the statistics. Williams presented a document to the court. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the crime statistics for that specific neighborhood. In the past year, there have been exactly 3 reported crimes on that street, 2 noise complaints, and 1 case of vandalism that was later determined to be accidental. Hardly a high-crime area, wouldn't you agree? Malcolm accepted the document, scanning it quickly. Evidence accepted. Officer Brantley, do you have a response? Brantley's face was now beet red, sweat beading on his forehead despite the courtroom's cool temperature. Statistics don't always tell the full story. There's unreported crime. Ah, invisible crime that only you can detect. Williams' voice dripped with sarcasm. Tell me, officer, do you have any special training in detecting unreported crime? Perhaps some psychic abilities the department should know about. Counselor, Malcolm warned, though he was privately enjoying watching Brantley squirm. Withdrawn, Williams said smoothly. Officer Brantley, let's talk about the physical altercation. You claim my client made a sudden movement. How long between when you first saw this movement and when you took him to the ground? Seconds. 2, maybe 3. 2 or 3 seconds. And in that time, you assessed that a phone was a weapon, decided force was necessary, and acted training and instinct. Training. Let's discuss that. How many hours of de-escalation training have you received in the past year? Brantley hesitated. The department requires... That's not what I asked. How many hours have you personally completed? I'd have to check my records. Williams produced another document. Allow me to help. According to departmental training records, you've completed 0 hours of de-escalation training in the past 3 years despite it being mandatory. You've been marked as delinquent in your training file. Is that accurate? Crawford stood. Objection. How did defense counsel obtain their public records, Your Honor? Williams interrupted. Available through FOIA request. Overruled. Answer the question, Officer Brantley. Brantley's jaw was clenched so tight, Malcolm could see the muscles twitching. I've been busy with active patrol duties. Too busy to learn how to avoid throwing teenagers to the ground, Williams shot back. Tell me, in those 347 arrests you've made, how many resulted in conviction? I don't keep track. 43, Williams announced. 43 convictions out of 347 arrests. That's a 12% conviction rate. Would you consider that successful police work? Sometimes charges get dropped for political reasons, Brantley muttered, his eyes darting to Malcolm. Are you suggesting that the district attorney's office and the judiciary are engaged in some conspiracy to release criminals? Malcolm asked sharply. No, Your Honor, I just... Officer Brantley. Williams continued, relentless now. Isn't it true that 6 months ago you were placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into excessive force? The gallery gasped. This was news to most people, including apparently Helen Crawford, who looked stunned. That matter was resolved, Brantley said quickly. Resolved how the complaint was withdrawn after the complainant moved out of state. Correct, Mr. Deshaun Harris, who alleged you broke his wrist during a traffic stop. Those allegations were never proven, just like the allegations from Ms. Tanya Washington 2 years ago, or Mr. Jerome Butler the year before that. All complaints of excessive force, all withdrawn or dismissed, after the complainants either moved away or stopped cooperating. Malcolm leaned forward. Officer Brantley, how many excessive force complaints have been filed against you in your career? Brantley was sweating profusely now. I don't have an exact... Mr. Williams, do you have that information? Malcolm asked. 17. Your Honor, 17 complaints in 14 years. Williams let that number hang in the air. That's more than 1 per year. Officer Brantley, doesn't that suggest a pattern? Those people were all criminals trying to... Those people. Williams pounced on the phrase. Like Jamal Thompson, an honor student with no criminal record working part-time while maintaining a 3.8 GPA, planning to study engineering at State University. Is he one of those people too? Brantley's composure finally shattered completely. "You're twisting everything. This is exactly why—" He stopped himself again. "Why what, officer?" Malcolm pressed. "Please finish your thought." Brantley looked up at Malcolm with barely concealed rage. "Why people like— Why certain judges shouldn't oversee certain cases. You can't be objective." The courtroom erupted. Crawford dropped her head into her hands. The bailiff stepped closer to the witness stand, sensing potential trouble. In the gallery, the off-duty cops looked uncomfortable, while Reverend Morrison and his group were nodding vindicated. "Order!" Malcolm banged his gavel, though his own composure was being tested. "Officer Brantley, are you suggesting that I cannot be impartial because of my race? I'm saying you have an agenda. My only agenda is justice, something that seems to have eluded many of your arrests." Malcolm took a breath, centering himself. "Mr. Williams, continue." But Marcus Williams sensed the moment was already won. "Just one more question, Officer Brantley. When you threw Jamal Thompson to the ground, when you pressed your knee into his back while he cried for his mother, when you handcuffed him so tightly it left marks that are still visible 6 weeks later, at any point did you consider that maybe, just maybe, you were wrong?" Brantley's response came through gritted teeth. "I don't second-guess myself." "No further questions, Your Honor." As Williams returned to his seat, he placed a reassuring hand on Jamal's shoulder. The young man was crying silently, the trauma of that night clearly still fresh. "Redirect Ms. Crawford," Malcolm asked. The prosecutor stood slowly, clearly trying to salvage something from the wreckage. "Officer Brantley, do you stand by your actions that night?" "Absolutely." "Do you believe you followed proper procedure?" "Yes." "No further questions." Malcolm nodded. "Officer Brantley, you may step—" "Your Honor." Marcus Williams interrupted. "I have a motion." "Proceed." Based on the officer's testimony, his admitted failure to identify himself, the lack of any reasonable suspicion for the stop, and the clear pattern of bias demonstrated by his arrest record, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client. Crawford stood to object, but her heart clearly wasn't in it. "Your Honor, the state believes the evidence should be weighed in its totality." "The totality of the evidence," Malcolm interrupted, "suggests that Mr. Thompson was arrested for walking while black by an officer with a documented pattern of racial bias and excessive force complaints. Is that really the case the state wants to pursue?" The question hung in the air. In the gallery, reporters were furiously typing on their phones. The FBI agents were taking notes. The community members were holding their breath. It was at that moment that Travis Brantley snapped. Maybe it was the dismissive tone in Malcolm's voice. Maybe it was the realization that his career was unraveling in real time. Maybe it was simply the fact that a black judge was about to rule against him in front of everyone he considered his people. Whatever the trigger, Brantley exploded from the witness chair. "You can't do this," he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "This is a setup. You people always stick together. Officer Brantley, sit down," the bailiff commanded, moving toward him. But Brantley wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were fixed on Malcolm, and in them was something primal. Something that had been lurking beneath the surface for 14 years of unchecked power. "You think you're better than me?" Brantley snarled, moving toward the bench. "You think that robe makes you special? Officer Brantley, you are in contempt of court," Malcolm declared, even as his hand moved toward the panic button under his desk. "Bailiff?" But Brantley was already in motion. With surprising speed for a man his size, he vaulted over the low barrier separating the witness area from the bench. Gasps and screams erupted from the gallery. The bailiff lunged for him but missed. Time seemed to slow as Brantley climbed the steps to the bench. Malcolm rose from his chair, his judicial robes billowing around him. For a split second, their eyes met the racist cop and the black judge, two symbols of everything right and wrong with the system, frozen in a moment that would be replayed on news channels for months to come. Then Brantley's hand moved fast and vicious, connecting with Malcolm's face with a sound that echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. The slap was more than just physical assault. It was years of resentment, decades of privilege being challenged, centuries of systemic racism condensed into a single shocking act of violence. Malcolm's head snapped to the side, his glasses flying off. But he didn't fall. He stood there, the red mark already visible on his dark skin, and in his eyes was not surprise or fear, but something closer to satisfaction, the satisfaction of a man who had just been proven absolutely undeniably right. The courtroom exploded into chaos. The bailiff and 2 court officers tackled Brantley to the ground. Phones appeared everywhere, recording every second. People were screaming, some trying to rush forward, others trying to flee. The FBI agents were on their feet, one speaking rapidly into his phone. "Stop!" Malcolm's voice boomed over the chaos, and surprisingly, people listened. Even Brantley, now pinned to the ground, stopped struggling for a moment. Malcolm touched his face where he'd been struck, then looked at his fingers as if checking for blood. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, controlled, and devastating in its clarity. "Officer Travis Brantley, you are under arrest for assault on a judicial officer, contempt of court, and disrupting a judicial proceeding." He looked down at the man being restrained on his courtroom floor. "You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you'll exercise it. You have the right to an attorney, and given what just happened in front of 3 dozen witnesses, and at least that many cameras, you're going to need one." As the officers hauled Brantley to his feet, he was still sputtering, still trying to justify himself. "He's biased. This whole thing is a setup. You all saw it. He was attacking me, attacking my character." "Your character," Malcolm said quietly, though his words carried through the hushed courtroom. "Attacked itself. All I did was hold up a mirror." The FBI agents had moved to the front of the courtroom now. One of them, a tall black woman with steel in her eyes, held up her badge. "Agent Patricia Coleman, FBI, will be taking custody of Officer Brantley. This is now a federal matter." "He can't do this," Brantley shouted as they cuffed him with his own handcuffs, a detail that wasn't lost on anyone. "This is America. I know my rights." "Funny how you remember your rights when they apply to you," Jamal Thompson said, speaking for the first time. The teenager stood tall despite his tears, his voice shaking but clear. "Where were my rights when you threw me on the ground? When you called me boy and told me I'd never amount to anything?" The courtroom fell silent again, all eyes on the young man who had started this, all by simply walking home from work. Malcolm looked at Jamal with something approaching pride. "Mr. Thompson, the court apologizes for what you've endured. Not just today, but 6 weeks ago." He turned to address the packed gallery. "This court is in recess. However, before we adjourn, let me be clear about what just happened here." He picked up his glasses from where they'd fallen, put them back on, and stood at his full height. The red mark on his face was darkening into what would be a bruise, but he wore it like a badge of honor. Today in this courtroom, we saw the truth laid bare. We saw what happens when authority without accountability meets justice without prejudice. We saw a man so accustomed to power that he couldn't handle being questioned by someone he considered beneath him. Malcolm's eyes swept the room, landing on the off-duty officers, the reporters, the community members, and finally on Helen Crawford. "Ms. Crawford, I expect the state to immediately drop all charges against Mr. Thompson. Furthermore, I am ordering a review of every arrest Officer Brantley has made in his career. Every single one." Crawford nodded mutely, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "Agent Coleman," Malcolm continued, "I'll be filing a complete report with your office. I trust the federal investigation will be thorough." "Count on it, Your Honor." Coleman replied, her grip firm on Brantley's arm. "We've been building a case for months. This," she gestured to the scene, "this just made our job much easier." As they led Brantley away, he turned back one last time, his face twisted with hatred. "This isn't over. You'll see. They'll never let you get away with this." "They already have," Malcolm replied simply. "That's what terrifies you. The doors closed behind Brantley, but the impact of what had just happened continued to ripple through the courtroom. Denise Thompson was sobbing, holding her son. Reverend Morrison was leading a prayer circle. Reporters were doing stand-ups, their voices urgent with breaking news. Marcus Williams approached the bench. "Your Honor, are you all right?" Malcolm touched his face again, wincing slightly. "I've been hit harder by the system itself, Counselor. This." He gestured to his face. "This is just the system showing its true face." "What happens now?" Williams asked. Malcolm looked out at his courtroom, his battlefield, where truth had finally won a decisive victory. Now we do what should have been done years ago. We clean house. Every officer with a pattern like Brantley's, every prosecutor who looked the other way, every judge who enabled this system, they're all on notice. He picked up his gavel, its weight familiar and comforting in his hand. Court is adjourned, but justice is just getting started. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Malcolm remained at the bench, thinking about his father's words. Dignity wasn't something anyone could take from you. But sometimes when you stood firm in that dignity, when you refused to bend or break the world, revealed itself for what it truly was. The slap would heal. The bruise would fade. But the image of Travis Brantley destroying his own career with his own hatred would endure forever, captured on dozens of phones broadcast across the nation, a perfect metaphor for a system that was finally being forced to confront its own reflection. Sarah Chen appeared at his side with an ice pack. "Your Honor, should I cancel your afternoon docket?" "No," Malcolm said firmly, accepting the ice pack with a grateful nod. "We have work to do. Send out a notice. I want a meeting with every judge in this courthouse tomorrow morning. It's time we discussed some changes." As he held the ice pack to his face, Malcolm thought about Jamal Thompson, free to walk home without fear, at least for tonight. He thought about the other Jamals out there, the ones who hadn't been lucky enough to have their cases heard in his courtroom. He thought about Officer Brantley, whose own prejudice had been his downfall, and the 17 complaints that should have been 17 warnings. Outside, he could hear the crowd gathering, their voices rising in songs of justice and solidarity. Tomorrow the editorials would come, the think pieces, the political responses, the inevitable backlash, and the equally inevitable support. But today, in this moment, Judge Malcolm Varelli stood in his courtroom with a bruised face and an unbroken spirit, knowing that sometimes justice came not from verdicts or sentences, but from the simple act of refusing to look away when truth stood naked before power. The red mark on his face would become famous, photographed, painted, memorialized. But what mattered more was what it represented, the moment when the system's mask didn't just slip, but was torn completely away, revealing the ugly truth beneath for all the world to see. And that truth, once seen, could never be unseen again. The news spread through Jefferson County like wildfire. Within minutes of Brantley being dragged from the courtroom, cell phone footage was already going viral. The image of Judge Malcolm Varelli, standing tall, despite the red handprint on his face, became the screenshot shared thousands of times before the sun set that day. Marcus Williams stayed behind after most had left, helping Jamal Thompson and his mother navigate the crowd of reporters waiting outside. "Don't say anything yet," he advised them quietly. "Let the video speak for itself tonight. Tomorrow, we'll hold a proper press conference." Denise Thompson gripped her son's hand tightly, still trembling from what she'd witnessed. "Mr. Williams, is it really over? They're really dropping the charges? After what just happened?" Marcus glanced back at the courthouse where Malcolm's chambers light was still on. "Ms. Thompson, your son isn't just free. He's become a symbol of everything wrong that needs to be made right. The district attorney wouldn't dare pursue charges now." Inside his chambers, Malcolm sat with Agent Patricia Coleman and her partner Agent David Chen, no relation to his clerk Sarah. The FBI agents had been waiting for this moment, though not quite in the dramatic fashion it had unfolded. "We've been investigating Officer Brantley for 8 months. Coleman explained, her notepad filled with meticulous notes. He's part of something bigger, Your Honor. A network of officers who've been operating like their own private army in the East End. Malcolm held the ice pack against his face, listening intently. How many officers? At least 12 that we can confirm, Agent Chen replied. They call themselves the Brotherhood. They coordinate arrests, share tactics for avoiding complaints, and most importantly, they protect each other when excessive force allegations arise. Those 17 complaints against Brantley, Malcolm said, understanding dawning on him. The witnesses who recanted or disappeared. Intimidation, Coleman confirmed. We have 2 witnesses in protective custody who are willing to testify about being threatened into withdrawing their complaints. But Brantley was always careful, always stayed just within the boundaries of what he could get away with, until today. Malcolm set down the ice pack, his sharp legal mind already working through the implications. You needed him to crack publicly. We needed something dramatic enough that his fellow officers couldn't protect him, Chen admitted. We didn't anticipate it would be assaulting a judge, but he gestured to Malcolm's face. This is actually better than anything we could have hoped for. No one can spin this, no union lawyer can minimize it. He attacked a judge in open court with dozens of witnesses. Sarah Chen knocked and entered, her face tight with concern. Your Honor, the Chief of Police is here. He's insistent about speaking with you. Chief Raymond Morrison, no relation to the Reverend, was a political animal who'd survived 20 years in Jefferson County by never taking a firm stance on anything. He entered Malcolm's chambers with the expression of a man facing his worst nightmare. Judge Varelli. He began, his usual politician's smile nowhere to be seen. First, let me express my shock and disgust at Officer Brantley's actions. Save it, Chief, Malcolm interrupted. Agent Coleman just informed me about the Brotherhood. You're going to tell me you had no idea 12 of your officers were operating as a rogue unit? Morrison's face went pale. He glanced at the FBI agents, calculating his options. I had suspicions, but without concrete evidence. 17 excessive force complaints against 1 officer isn't concrete enough. Malcolm stood, his judicial robes still bearing wrinkles from the altercation. Chief Morrison, you're either grossly incompetent or willfully complicit. Which would you prefer on your resignation letter? Now wait a minute. No, you wait. Malcolm's voice carried the same authority that had commanded the courtroom. A young man was brutalized for walking home. A pattern of abuse has been allowed to flourish under your watch. And today, one of your officers felt so emboldened that he assaulted a judge in open court. The time for waiting is over. Morrison loosened his tie, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Judge, if I resign now, it'll look like the entire department is corrupt. Isn't it? Agent Coleman asked quietly. Chief Morrison, we have evidence that you personally intervened to get 3 excessive force complaints against Brantley dismissed. We have emails, recorded conversations. Your cooperation now might be the only thing that saves you from indictment. The chief sank into a chair, his facade completely crumbled. Outside the chambers, they could hear the crowd growing larger, their chants for justice echoing through the courthouse walls. 3 blocks away, in a bar known to be a cop hangout, Officer Dennis Murphy was watching the news coverage with growing alarm. He pulled out his phone, sending rapid text messages to a group chat labeled Brotherhood. Brantley lost it. Feds are involved. Everyone needs to lawyer up now. The responses came quickly. What the hell was he thinking? This is on him, not us. Delete everything. Meeting tomorrow, usual place. Murphy downed his whiskey in one gulp, his mind racing. He'd been part of the Brotherhood for 6 years, had stood by, while Brantley and others crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. But he'd always told himself he was one of the good ones, that he only went along to avoid becoming a target himself. His phone rang. His wife's picture appeared on the screen. Dennis, I'm watching the news. Please tell me you weren't involved in this. I wasn't there, Maria. I had nothing to do with what Brantley did. That's not what I'm asking. His wife's voice was cold. I'm asking if you were part of whatever led to this. All those nights you came home and wouldn't talk about work. All those times you said you were just following orders. Murphy closed his eyes. Maria, our son is 15, Dennis. He's a year younger than that boy Brantley arrested. What if it had been him walking home? Our son is... Murphy stopped himself before saying white. The silence stretched between them. I'm taking Tommy and going to my mother's, Maria said finally. When you decide whether you're a cop or a member of whatever sick club you've gotten yourself into, call me. The line went dead. Murphy ordered another whiskey, knowing that across the city, similar conversations were happening in other homes. Other marriages strained to the breaking point by secrets too heavy to bear. Back at the courthouse, Malcolm was finishing his official statement for the federal record when Marcus Williams returned, having successfully shepherded the Thompson family past the media gauntlet. Your Honor, there's something else, Williams said, his expression troubled. I've been getting calls all evening. Other victims of the Brotherhood want to come forward. Families who were too scared before they're seeing what happened today as a sign that maybe finally someone will listen. How many? Malcolm asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. So far, 43, and that's just in the last 2 hours. The number hung between them, representing not just individual cases, but entire families, traumatized entire communities, living in fear of those sworn to protect them. Agent Coleman stood gathering her files. Judge Varelli, we're going to need your help. These people trust you. After what happened today, you've become, well, a symbol. Malcolm touched his face again, the bruise now fully formed purple and pronounced against his dark skin. I never asked to be a symbol. No one ever does, Coleman replied. But sometimes history chooses for us. What matters is what we do when that moment arrives. As the FBI agents left, Malcolm found himself alone with Marcus Williams. The younger attorney was looking at him with something approaching awe. Don't, Malcolm warned. Don't make me into something I'm not. I'm just a judge who asked questions that should have been asked years ago. With respect, Your Honor, you're more than that now. You're proof that the system can work, that truth can prevail. Do you know how many young black lawyers, hell, young black people, period, are watching what happened today and thinking, maybe, just maybe, things can change? Before Malcolm could respond, his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed his ex-wife, Patricia. He'd been expecting this call. Patricia, he answered, stepping away for privacy. Malcolm, I saw the news. Are you all right? My God, your face. I'm fine. Bruised but not broken. That's not funny. You could have been seriously hurt. What if he'd had a gun? He didn't. But what if... Patricia. Malcolm interrupted gently. I knew the risks when I took this position. We both did. It's why we... He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew their marriage had ended partly because of the pressure, the threats, the constant weight of being the first black judge in a county that wasn't ready for it. I know, she said softly. I'm proud of you, Malcolm. Despite everything, I want you to know that. What you did today, standing up to that monster, it matters. After the call ended, Malcolm walked to his window, looking out at the crowd that had grown to hundreds. They were holding candles now, as dusk settled over Jefferson County. Someone had started singing, "We Shall Overcome," and others had joined in, their voices rising in harmony. Among the crowd, he spotted a familiar figure. Reverend James Morrison stood at the front leading the singing, but his eyes were turned up toward Malcolm's window. When their eyes met, the Reverend raised his fist in solidarity. Malcolm's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his daughter Jasmine, away at Howard Law School, following in his footsteps. Dad, you're trending on Twitter. Hashtag Judge Varelli, # Justice in Jefferson. My professors are using what happened in class discussions. You're a hero. He texted back, not a hero, just a judge doing his job. Her response was immediate. That's what makes you a hero. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah Chen entered with a stack of messages and a concerned expression. Your Honor, these are just from the last hour. Interview requests from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, The New York Times, Washington Post. Everyone wants to talk to you. No interviews, Malcolm said firmly. Not yet. The focus needs to stay on the systemic issues, not on me. There's also this. Sarah handed him an official-looking envelope, delivered by special courier from the state capitol. Malcolm opened it, reading quickly. It was from the governor expressing support and announcing a state-level investigation into police practices in Jefferson County. Political cover Malcolm recognized, but useful nonetheless. As the evening wore on, Malcolm remained in his chambers working through the legal implications of what would need to happen next. Every arrest Brantley had made would need to be reviewed. Every officer connected to the Brotherhood would need to be investigated. The entire police department would need to be restructured. His phone rang again. This time it was Judge Dorothy Chen, the senior-most judge in the courthouse and one of the few who'd supported his appointment from the beginning. Malcolm, I've called an emergency meeting of all judges for tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. sharp. What happened today affects all of us. The entire judicial system in this county needs to respond with one voice. Thank you, Dorothy. I was going to request the same. Malcolm, she paused. I've been on the bench for 23 years. I've seen a lot. But what I saw today, that officer's complete disregard for the sanctity of the court, his assault on you, it wasn't just an attack on one judge. It was an attack on justice itself. I know. Do you? Because tomorrow the backlash begins. The police union will mobilize. The political machinery will start spinning. There will be those who try to paint Brantley as one bad apple, who try to minimize what happened. Let them try, Malcolm said, his voice steady with resolve. They can't minimize what dozens of cameras captured. They can't spin away the truth when it's been broadcast to millions. After the call ended, Malcolm finally allowed himself a moment of exhaustion. He sat heavily in his chair, the events of the day catching up with him. The slap had been shocking in its violence, but what struck him more was the inevitability of it. Brantley had been a bomb waiting to explode, and the system had not only allowed it, but nurtured it. Outside his window, the crowd continued to grow. He could see news vans arriving, their satellite dishes reaching toward the darkening sky like modern prayers for truth. Tomorrow, the story would dominate national headlines. Pundits would debate, politicians would posture, and somewhere in the East End, young black men would still wonder if it was safe to walk home. But something had shifted today. The mask had not just slipped, it had been torn away entirely. The ugly truth of the Brotherhood of systematic oppression, dressed in uniform, could no longer be denied or ignored. Marcus Williams had been right about one thing: Malcolm had become a symbol. But symbols, he knew, were only as powerful as the movements they inspired. And as he watched the candlelight vigil below, as he thought about the 43 families ready to come forward, as he considered the FBI investigation that would dig deep into the rot at the heart of Jefferson County's police force, Malcolm understood that today's violence had sparked something that couldn't be extinguished. The phone rang once more. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. Judge Varelli. This is Officer Dennis Murphy. I need to talk to someone. About the Brotherhood. About what we've done. I want to come forward, but I'm scared. They'll kill me if they find out I'm talking to you. Malcolm sat up straight. A crack in the blue wall. Officer Murphy, where are you now? Murphy's Bar on Elm. But I can't stay here. Too many eyes. Listen to me very carefully. Contact Agent Patricia Coleman at the FBI. Tell her I sent you. She'll protect you. Judge, I'm sorry. For all of it. We knew what Brantley was. We all knew. And we did nothing. You're doing something now, Malcolm said. That's what matters. After Murphy hung up, Malcolm stood and walked back to the window. The crowd had grown even larger, and now he could see officers in riot gear assembling 2 blocks away. The sight sent a chill through him. Even now, even after everything that had happened today, the instinct was to respond with force. He picked up his phone and called the mayor directly. Mayor Patterson, this is Judge Varelli. I'm looking at riot police assembling near a peaceful vigil. If you send those officers in, you'll turn a moment of justice into a night of violence. The whole nation is watching Jefferson County right now. What do you want them to see?" There was a long pause before the mayor responded. "Judge, the chief says he needs to maintain order. The chief who allowed the Brotherhood to operate unchecked. The chief who's about to be under federal investigation. Is that really who you want making decisions right now?" Another pause. "What do you suggest? Send the riot police home. Let the people mourn. Let them sing. Let them express their pain and their hope. Show the nation that Jefferson County can choose justice over force, healing over violence." 20 minutes later, Malcolm watched as the riot police withdrew. The crowd, noticing their departure, cheered and continued their vigil with renewed energy. As the night deepened, Malcolm finally prepared to leave his chambers. His face throbbed where Brantley had struck him, but the pain felt almost sacred, a physical reminder of the moment when truth and lies had collided in the most dramatic way possible. He gathered his things, including the growing pile of witness statements from victims ready to come forward. Tomorrow would bring challenges he knew. The Brotherhood wouldn't go down without a fight. The system that had protected them would resist change with every tool at its disposal. But tonight, as Judge Malcolm Varelli walked through the courthouse toward the rear exit his security had arranged, he allowed himself a moment of something approaching hope. Not because one racist cop had been arrested, not because his own assault had been captured on camera, but because Officer Murphy had called, because 43 families were ready to speak, because the FBI was closing in. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the arc of the moral universe really did bend toward justice. The sound of the slap still echoed in his mind, but it was being drowned out by the songs of the crowd, by the voices of those who refused to be silenced any longer. Travis Brantley had thought he was striking down a symbol of change, but instead, he had become the catalyst for it. As Malcolm stepped into the waiting car, his phone lit up with one final message of the night. It was from Jamal Thompson. "Thank you, Your Honor, for believing me, for standing up, for showing me that truth still matters." Malcolm typed back, "Truth always mattered, Jamal. Today we just made sure everyone could see it." The car pulled away into the night, passing the vigil, where hundreds of candles created a constellation of light against the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight, justice had won a victory that would echo through Jefferson County and beyond for years to come. The morning came too quickly, bringing with it a media storm that Malcolm had anticipated but still found overwhelming. He arrived at the courthouse at 6:30 a.m., 30 minutes before the emergency judicial meeting, only to find news vans lined up like soldiers at attention. The bruise on his face had darkened overnight into a deep purple testament to yesterday's violence, and he knew every camera would zoom in on it. Inside the conference room, his fellow judges were already gathering. Dorothy Chen sat at the head of the table, her usually composed face tight with concern. Judge Robert Harrison, a conservative who'd openly opposed Malcolm's appointment, avoided eye contact. Judge Teresa Martinez, the county's first Latina judge, gave Malcolm a supportive nod as he entered. "Before we begin," Dorothy said, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation, "I want to state for the record that what happened yesterday was an assault on the entire judicial system. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us." "Agreed," Teresa said firmly. Several others nodded, though Malcolm noticed Harrison remained still. "The question," Harrison finally spoke, his voice carefully neutral, "is how we respond without appearing to prejudice any potential cases against Officer Brantley or his associates." "With respect, Bob," Malcolm said, speaking for the first time, "neutrality in the face of blatant assault isn't justice. It's complicity." The room fell silent. Harrison's face reddened. "I'm not suggesting we remain neutral, Malcolm. I'm saying we need to be careful. The police union is already mobilizing. They're painting you as biased, saying you provoked Brantley." "Provoked him?" Teresa's voice rose. "By asking questions, by doing his job. I'm just telling you what they're saying. Harrison defended. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. County commissioners, state representatives, they're all concerned about. About what? Dorothy interrupted. Dorothy? About maintaining the status quo that allowed the Brotherhood to operate for years. About keeping the peace by sacrificing justice. Before Harrison could respond, Sarah Chen knocked and entered. Your Honors, forgive the interruption. Judge Varelli, Agent Coleman is here with urgent information. Patricia Coleman entered, looking like she hadn't slept. Her usually pristine suit was wrinkled, and her eyes held the intensity of someone on the verge of a breakthrough. Judges, I apologize for interrupting, but there's been a development. Officer Dennis Murphy came to us last night. He's providing full cooperation about the Brotherhood's operations. The room erupted in whispers. Malcolm remained silent, not revealing his role in Murphy's decision. Coleman continued. According to Murphy, the Brotherhood goes deeper than we thought. It's not just about excessive force and coordinated arrests. They've been running a protection racket in the East End, taking payments from drug dealers in exchange for looking the other way and using excessive force against anyone who wouldn't pay. Good God, Dorothy breathed. There's more, Coleman said, her eyes finding Malcolm's. Murphy has recordings. Conversations where Brantley and others discussed Judge Varelli specifically. They knew about his history in the East End, saw his appointment as a threat to their operations. They've been planning to, quote, deal with him for months. The weight of this revelation settled over the room. Malcolm felt a chill despite the warm morning. He'd known there was resistance to his appointment, but this was something else, a criminal conspiracy that had painted a target on his back from day one. How many officers are involved? Teresa asked. Murphy has named 18 so far, including 2 sergeants and a lieutenant, but he believes it goes higher. Chief Morrison, Dorothy asked what everyone was thinking. Murphy says Morrison knew, but looked the other way in exchange for the Brotherhood keeping crime stats low in certain areas. It made him look effective, helped his political standing. Harrison stood abruptly. This is... if this gets out. When? Coleman corrected. When this gets out. We're coordinating with the Department of Justice for a complete takeover of the Jefferson County Police Department. This is no longer just about one officer assaulting a judge. This is about organized crime operating under color of law. Malcolm's phone vibrated. It was a text from Marcus Williams. Press conference in 1 hour. The Thompsons want you there. I need to go, Malcolm said, standing. The Thompson family is holding a press conference. Malcolm, Dorothy said, be careful. If the Brotherhood has been planning something, they already took their shot, Malcolm replied, touching his bruised face. And they missed. Outside the courthouse, the crowd from last night had been replaced by an even larger gathering. Community organizers had set up a podium on the courthouse steps, and hundreds of people were assembling. Malcolm spotted Reverend Morrison coordinating with other clergy, both black and white, a show of interfaith solidarity. Marcus Williams met him at the side entrance. Your Honor, thank you for coming. The family specifically requested your presence. They want the city to see you standing with them. This isn't about me, Marcus. With respect, Your Honor, it became about you the moment Brantley's hand connected with your face. You're part of this story now, whether you wanted to be or not. They made their way to the podium where Denise Thompson stood with her son, both dressed in their Sunday best, despite it being Thursday morning. Jamal looked older somehow, as if the past 24 hours had aged him years. The crowd quieted as Denise approached the microphone, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded a piece of paper. My name is Denise Thompson. She began, her voice stronger than her shaking hand suggested. I'm a single mother. I work 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. I raised my son to respect the law, to work hard, to believe that in America, if you do the right things, you'll be treated fairly. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. 6 weeks ago, my son was walking home from his job mentoring younger kids at the community center. He was thrown to the ground, handcuffed, and arrested for the crime of being black after dark. Yesterday we saw Officer Brantley for what he truly is, not a bad apple, but part of a rotten tree that's been poisoning our community for years." The crowd murmured agreement. Denise continued. "But yesterday we also saw something else. We saw Judge Malcolm Varelli stand up to that corruption even when it literally struck him in the face. We saw the system finally start to work for us instead of against us." She stepped back, and Jamal took her place at the microphone. The teenager cleared his throat, his eyes finding Malcolm's in the crowd. "I want to thank Judge Varelli," Jamal said, his young voice carrying across the plaza. "Not just for dismissing my case, but for seeing me. For seeing me as more than a statistic, more than a threat, more than whatever Officer Brantley thought he saw that night. Your Honor, when you stood up after he hit you, when you didn't fall, you showed every young black man in this city that we don't have to fall either." The crowd erupted in applause. Malcolm felt the weight of the young man's words, the responsibility they carried. He hadn't asked to be a symbol, but symbols he was learning weren't chosen. They were created by moments like these. Marcus Williams took the microphone next. "Today we're announcing a federal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Brantley, the Jefferson County Police Department Chief Morrison, and the city itself. But more than that, we're announcing that 47 families have come forward with similar stories of abuse at the hands of the Brotherhood." The number had grown overnight. Malcolm watched as reporters frantically took notes as cameras captured the moment. "We're also calling for a complete federal oversight of the police department, the immediate resignation of Chief Morrison, and a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to address decades of police abuse in the East End." As Marcus continued outlining their demands, Malcolm noticed movement in his peripheral vision. A group of off-duty officers had gathered across the street, their faces hard with anger. Among them, he recognized several names from Murphy's list of Brotherhood members. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then answered on instinct. "Judge Varelli." The voice was rough, angry. "This is Lieutenant Mike Peterson. You might know me as one of the Brotherhood." Malcolm stepped away from the crowd, signaling to the security detail that had been assigned to him. "Lieutenant Peterson. You think you've won something here? You think taking down Brantley means anything? He was an idiot losing control like that. But the rest of us, we're smarter, we're patient, and we have long memories. Is that a threat, Lieutenant?" "It's a promise. You can't stay in that courthouse forever. You can't have security forever. And that boy Jamal, he definitely can't." The line went dead. Malcolm immediately called Agent Coleman, relaying the conversation. Within minutes, federal agents were moving through the crowd, adding their presence to the security detail. The press conference continued with Reverend Morrison taking the podium to call for peace and justice in equal measure. But Malcolm's attention was divided now, watching the crowd for threats, wondering how many Brotherhood members were out there waiting. As the event concluded, Agent Coleman appeared at his side. "We traced the call. Peterson made it from the police station. He's that brazen." "Or that stupid," Malcolm replied. "He just threatened a federal judge and a witness in an ongoing investigation. We're arresting him within the hour. But Judge, this confirms what Murphy told us. The Brotherhood isn't going to go quietly. They see this as war." "Then we give them one," Malcolm said, surprising himself with the steel in his voice. "But we fight with the law, with truth, with justice. Everything they've abandoned." That afternoon, back in his chambers, Malcolm found himself in an unusual position, being interviewed by the FBI as a victim, rather than presiding as a judge. Agent Chen led the questioning while Coleman took notes. "Take us through the moments before the assault," Chen requested. Malcolm recounted the cross-examination, Brantley's growing agitation, the moment when rage overtook reason. As he spoke, he found himself analyzing Brantley's psychology, the fragility of a man whose entire identity was built on a foundation of perceived superiority. He couldn't handle being questioned by someone he saw as inferior, Malcolm concluded. In his world, I wasn't supposed to be wearing these robes, wasn't supposed to have authority over him. When that worldview was challenged publicly, he snapped. "Murphy's recordings support that," Coleman said, pulling out a tablet. "May I?" She played an audio file. Brantley's voice filled the room full of venom. That boy thinks he's something special because they gave him a robe. Someone needs to remind him where he comes from, what he really is. Another voice, Peterson's, "Patience, Travis. Our time will come." Brantley again. "I'm tired of being patient. Every day I have to see him up there pretending to be better than us. Every day I have to watch these people get bolder thinking they're protected." The recording ended. Malcolm felt sick, not from fear, but from the naked hatred in those voices, the casual dehumanization. "There are hours of these," Coleman said quietly. "Planning sessions, discussions of tactics, target lists." Target lists. Community leaders, activists, anyone they saw as a threat. You were near the top judge. Sarah knocked and entered, her face grave. "Your Honor, you need to see this." She turned on the television to a local news channel. Chief Morrison was holding a press conference, flanked by police union representatives. The actions of Officer Brantley were inexcusable. Morrison was saying, reading from prepared notes. However, we must not allow one officer's momentary lapse in judgment to tarnish the reputation of our entire department. "Momentary lapse," Malcolm said incredulously. Morrison continued. "We are conducting our own internal investigation and will cooperate with federal authorities. However, I want to assure the citizens of Jefferson County that their police force remains committed to serving and protecting all communities equally." The union representative took the microphone. "We also want to address the inflammatory rhetoric coming from certain activists, and frankly from certain members of the judiciary, who seem more interested in grandstanding than justice." "He's talking about you," Sarah said unnecessarily. "The police union stands behind our officers who do difficult jobs under impossible circumstances. While we don't condone Officer Brantley's actions, we understand the pressure these men and women are under, especially when facing hostile questioning designed to make them look bad." Malcolm turned off the television. "They're trying to spin it. Make Brantley the victim." "Let them try," Coleman said. "We have the recordings. We have Murphy's testimony. We have physical evidence of the protection racket. Their spin won't hold." That evening, Malcolm presided over a different kind of gathering. In the basement of First Baptist Church, 47, families had assembled, all victims of the Brotherhood's reign of terror. He wasn't there as a judge, but as a witness, someone who understood what it meant to stand against the system. Marcus Williams had organized the meeting, creating a safe space for stories that had been suppressed for years. One by one, people stood and shared their experiences. An elderly man named Walter Hayes spoke about his grandson arrested by Brantley 3 years ago, charged with resisting arrest after asking why he was being stopped. The boy spent 6 months in jail awaiting trial, lost his college scholarship, and spiraled into depression. A woman named Shaniqua Davis told of her husband being beaten by 3 Brotherhood members after refusing to pay protection money for his corner store. When he tried to file a complaint, he was arrested on trumped-up charges and threatened with worse if he didn't leave town. A teenager showed scars from where Peterson had slammed him against a brick wall for looking suspicious while waiting for a bus. Story after story, year after year of accumulated trauma poured out in that church basement. Malcolm listened to each one, taking notes, preparing for the legal battles ahead. These weren't just statistics or case numbers. These were his people, his community, the very folks he'd grown up with and fought to serve. "Why now?" someone asked. "Why are we only being heard now?" Marcus deferred to Malcolm, who stood slowly, aware that his words carried weight in this room. "Because Officer Brantley made a mistake," Malcolm said simply. "He showed the world what we've always known. He pulled back the curtain on a system that's operated in shadows for too long. His hand striking my face was caught on camera, but the bruises you carry, the ones that don't show, those matter just as much." "But will it change anything?" Shaniqua Davis asked, skepticism, born from years of disappointment, clear in her voice. "It already has," Malcolm replied. 18 officers are under federal investigation. The Department of Justice is taking over the police department. Chief Morrison will be gone within a week, mark my words. But more than that, the world is watching Jefferson County now. They can't ignore us anymore. Reverend Morrison, who'd been quiet throughout the meeting, finally spoke. Judge Varelli is right. But we must remember, this is not about vengeance. This is about justice, about redemption, about building a better community for our children. Amen. Several voices responded. As the meeting concluded, Malcolm found himself standing outside the church with Marcus Williams and Reverend Morrison. The night was cool autumn creeping into Jefferson County, and they could hear sirens in the distance, the soundtrack of the East End. You know they'll come after you harder now, the Reverend said to Malcolm. The Brotherhood, their supporters. You've become their focal point. I know. Are you ready for that? Malcolm thought about the question, about the weight of being a symbol, about the target on his back that had only grown larger. I don't think anyone's ever ready for something like this. But ready or not, here we are. Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his eyes widening. Your Honor, you need to see this. He showed them the screen. A video was going viral. Someone had leaked portions of Murphy's confession to the media. The former Brotherhood member was on tape, describing in detail how they planted evidence, coordinated false arrests, and maintained their protection racket. The timestamp showed it had been posted just minutes ago, but it already had thousands of shares. Who leaked it? Reverend Morrison asked. Does it matter? Marcus replied. The truth is out there now. There's no putting it back in the bottle. Malcolm's phone began ringing immediately. Sarah calling to alert him to the leak. Then Agent Coleman, furious about the breach in security. Then reporters somehow having gotten his personal number. He silenced them all. Tomorrow's going to be chaos, he said. Good, Marcus replied. Chaos means change. The status quo is breaking apart. As Malcolm drove home that night, accompanied by his security detail, he thought about his father again. The old man had lived his whole life in Jefferson County, had seen the worst of what the system could do to black folks who stepped out of line. But he'd also believed in the possibility of change, in the power of standing firm in your truth. His phone rang one more time. His daughter, Jasmine. Dad, I'm coming home this weekend. I want to be there to support you. Jasmine, no, it's not safe. Dad, I'm studying law because of you. Because you showed me that the system could be challenged, changed. You think I'm going to sit in my dorm room while you're fighting this fight alone? He thought about arguing, then realized she'd inherited his own stubbornness. All right, but you stay close to security at all times. Deal. Dad. Yes. I love you, and I'm proud of you. The whole campus is talking about what happened. My criminal law professor used your questioning of Brantley as an example of proper judicial intervention. You're literally becoming a textbook case. After the call, Malcolm allowed himself a small smile despite everything. Change was coming to Jefferson County, painful and chaotic as it might be. The Brotherhood was being exposed, their protection racket crumbling, their members turning on each other. Chief Morrison's press conference had been desperate damage control, but the leaked recordings would destroy any credibility he had left. As he pulled into his driveway, Malcolm noticed a car parked across the street that hadn't been there this morning. His security detail noticed it too, one of them speaking quickly into his radio. The car pulled away slowly, but not before Malcolm glimpsed the driver, one of the officers from Murphy's list, one of the Brotherhood. They were watching him. Let them watch, he thought. Let them see that he wouldn't be intimidated, wouldn't back down. The bruise on his face was fading, but the resolve it had sparked was only growing stronger. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new battles. But tonight, sitting in his home, Malcolm Varelli knew that something fundamental had shifted in Jefferson County. The slap that was meant to silence him had instead become a wake-up call that echoed across the nation. The Brotherhood had ruled through fear for years, but fear only worked when people believed they were alone. Now, with 47 families ready to speak with federal agents closing in with the truth spreading faster than lies could contain it, that fear was transforming into something else: determination. The leaked recordings exploded across social media like a bomb in the early morning hours. By sunrise, Jefferson County was the top trending topic on every major platform, and Malcolm woke to find protesters already gathering outside the police station demanding Morrison's immediate resignation. The chief had called an emergency meeting with his remaining loyal officers, but according to Agent Coleman's morning briefing, more than half the force had refused to attend. Malcolm stood in his kitchen watching the news coverage while his security detail checked the perimeter of his property. The bruise on his face had faded to a yellowish green, but the cameras still zoomed in on it every time his image appeared on screen. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since 5 a.m. "Your Honor." Agent Coleman's voice came through during their secure call. "We've arrested Lieutenant Peterson for making terroristic threats. He's invoking his union representative, but with the recorded call to you, we have him dead to rights." "How many more arrests?" "By end of day, we're looking at 12, possibly 15. Murphy's cooperation has been invaluable. He's provided us with financial records showing the Brotherhood's protection money flowing through multiple accounts. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 5 years." Malcolm set down his coffee cup. The weight of these revelations still striking him despite everything he'd witnessed. Where's the money trail lead? Higher than Morrison. We've got connections to 2 city councilmen and possibly a state senator. This is turning into a RICO case. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, designed to take down the mob, now being used against corrupted law enforcement. The irony wasn't lost on Malcolm. His daughter Jasmine arrived an hour later, escorted by campus security she'd arranged. When Malcolm opened the door, she immediately threw her arms around him, studying his face with the intense scrutiny of someone who'd inherited his analytical mind. "It looks worse on TV," she said, touching the bruise gently. "Everything looks worse on TV," Malcolm replied, holding his daughter tight. "You shouldn't have come." And Miss History being made. "Dad, my constitutional law professor, says what's happening here could set precedent for federal intervention in corrupt police departments nationwide." They were interrupted by Sarah Chen calling with urgent news. Chief Morrison had just announced his resignation effective immediately, but not before making one last inflammatory statement, claiming he was being scapegoated for political purposes. "He's going scorched earth," Sarah reported. "He's claiming you and the federal government are conducting a witch hunt, that the Brotherhood doesn't exist, that Murphy is a disgruntled officer making things up for immunity." Malcolm turned on the television to see Morrison at a podium looking haggard and desperate. Behind him stood several officers Malcolm recognized from Murphy's list, Brotherhood members still trying to maintain their innocence. "This is a dark day for law enforcement," Morrison was saying, "when unsubstantiated allegations from a single troubled officer can destroy careers built over decades. When a judge can use his position to pursue a personal vendetta because one officer lost his temper under extreme provocation." "Extreme provocation," Jasmine said incredulously. "You asked him questions," Morrison continued. "I've served this community for 20 years. My record speaks for itself. Crime rates are down. Community relations have improved." His speech was cut short as FBI agents walked onto the stage. Agent Chen stepped to the microphone as Morrison was led away in handcuffs, the cameras capturing every second. "Chief Raymond Morrison is under arrest for conspiracy racketeering and obstruction of justice," Chen announced calmly. "The federal government is assuming control of the Jefferson County Police Department effective immediately." The remaining Brotherhood members on stage scattered, some attempting to leave through side exits, only to find more federal agents waiting. Within minutes, 6 more arrests were made on live television. Malcolm's phone rang. It was Dorothy Chen from the courthouse. "Malcolm, emergency meeting, now. Harrison is making a motion." When Malcolm arrived at the courthouse flanked by security, he found the judicial conference room in chaos. Robert Harrison stood at the head of the table, papers spread before him. "This has gone too far," Harrison was declaring to the assembled judges. "The federal takeover, the arrests, the media circus, it's destroying the credibility of our entire legal system." "Bob, what are you doing?" Dorothy asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm calling for Judge Varelli to recuse himself from any cases involving police officers going forward. His bias is clear, demonstrated by his conduct in the Thompson case." "His conduct?" Teresa Martinez stood, her face flushed with anger. "You mean when he was physically assaulted for doing his job? I mean his inflammatory questioning that provoked—" "Choose your next words very carefully, Bob." Malcolm interrupted, his voice carrying the same authority that had commanded his courtroom. "Because it sounds like you're about to justify assault." Harrison faltered, but pressed on. "I'm not justifying anything. I'm saying that your experience has created an insurmountable bias. You can't fairly adjudicate cases involving law enforcement anymore." "Is that your opinion?" Dorothy asked coolly. "Or the opinion of whoever called you this morning? Because I know for a fact you received 3 calls from the police union before this meeting." Harrison's face reddened. "That's irrelevant." "It's entirely relevant," Malcolm said, standing. "You're carrying water for the same system that produced the Brotherhood. Tell me, Bob, in your 15 years on the bench, how many excessive force complaints have you dismissed? How many officers have you given the benefit of the doubt to? I've followed the law. You've followed the path of least resistance, and that path led straight to my face being struck in open court." Malcolm moved closer to Harrison. "You want me to recuse myself? File the motion officially. Let's make it public. Let's have a hearing where we can discuss your own record with police cases." Harrison gathered his papers hastily. "This isn't over." "No," Malcolm agreed. "It's just beginning." After Harrison stormed out, the remaining judges sat in stunned silence. Finally, Dorothy spoke. "He's been compromised. The union has something on him." "Or he's just a coward," Teresa suggested. "Either way, he's shown his true colors." Malcolm's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus Williams. "Emergency. Jamal Thompson's been threatened. Family needs protection now." Malcolm immediately called Agent Coleman, who dispatched agents to the Thompson home. Within an hour, they reported back that the family was safe but shaken. Someone had spray-painted "Snitch" on their house and left a dead rat on their doorstep. "They're getting desperate," Coleman told Malcolm during a secure call. "The Brotherhood knows the walls are closing in. We've frozen their accounts, arrested their leadership. The remaining members are lashing out." "How many are still out there?" "Maybe 6 or 7 that we haven't arrested yet." "But Judge, there's something else. We've been monitoring social media, and there's chatter about a rally tomorrow. Brotherhood supporters, police union members, their families, they're planning to march on the courthouse." "Let them march," Malcolm said. "It's their right." "Sir, with respect, these aren't peaceful protesters. These are people who see you as the enemy, who blame you for destroying their lives. Their lives were built on corruption and brutality. If exposing that destroyed them, that's justice, not persecution." That evening, Malcolm sat in his home study, with Jasmine reviewing case law for the inevitable legal challenges ahead. She'd insisted on helping her legal training, making her a valuable asset, despite his concerns for her safety. "Dad," she said suddenly, looking up from a law review article. "What you did in that courtroom, standing up after Brantley hit you, not backing down, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen." "It wasn't bravery," Malcolm replied. "It was necessity. If I had shown weakness in that moment, if I had let his violence achieve its goal of intimidation, everything we fought for would have crumbled." "Still brave, though," she insisted. Then her expression grew serious. "Are you scared about tomorrow?" "The rally." Before he could answer, his security detail burst through the door. "Sir, we need to move you. Now." Through the window, Malcolm could see flames. Someone had set fire to his garage. As they rushed him and Jasmine to a secure vehicle, he could hear sirens approaching, see neighbors emerging from their homes. They were taken to a federal safe house, a nondescript building downtown where Agent Coleman was waiting. The fire was arson, she confirmed. Security cameras caught 2 individuals in masks. Based on body type and movement patterns, we believe they're Brotherhood members. They burned my house, Malcolm asked, the reality settling in. The garage and part of the first floor. Fire department contained it, but... Coleman's expression was grim. This is escalation. They're not just threatening anymore. Jasmine gripped her father's hand. Maybe I should go back to campus. No, Malcolm said firmly. We don't run. We don't hide. That's what they want, to make us afraid, to make us abandon the fight. Your Honor, Coleman said. I have to advise. I'll take your security recommendations, Malcolm interrupted. But tomorrow I'm going to that courthouse. If there's a rally, I'll face it. We cannot let terrorism win. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, fitting weather for what was to come. The rally had grown larger than expected, hundreds of police supporters, many carrying signs with Brantley's picture declaring him a sacrificial lamb, and Morrison a political prisoner. Counter-protesters had also gathered, including many of the families who'd come forward with Brotherhood abuse stories. The 2 groups were separated by barricades and a heavy federal law enforcement presence, but the tension was electric. Malcolm arrived at the courthouse through an underground entrance, but word of his presence spread quickly. The crowd's chanting grew louder. Varelli must go! Varelli must go! In his chambers he could hear them clearly. Sarah Chen was fielding calls from national media, wanting statements, while Agent Coleman coordinated security with her team. Your Honor, Marcus Williams arrived accompanied by Jamal Thompson and his mother. They insisted on being here today, to show they're not intimidated. Denise Thompson's eyes were red from crying, but her jaw was set with determination. They burned a cross on our lawn last night after the agents left. My boy didn't deserve any of this, but we won't back down. Mrs. Thompson, Malcolm said gently, you've shown more courage than anyone should have to. Your son's case started, all this brought the truth to light. No, Your Honor, Jamal said quietly. You did that. When you kept asking questions, when you wouldn't let Brantley hide behind his badge, you gave us hope that someone in power actually cared about the truth. Outside, someone with a megaphone was speaking to the pro-police rally. Malcolm recognized the voice. It was Harrison, the judge, who'd tried to force his recusal. The federal government has overreached, Harrison was declaring. They've destroyed the careers of good men based on the word of a single turncoat officer. They've let violent criminals back on the streets while arresting those who protected us. The crowd roared approval. Someone started chanting, "Blue Lives Matter," and others joined in. Dorothy Chen entered Malcolm's chambers, her face tight with anger. Harrison's lost his mind. He's actively undermining the judiciary now. Or showing who he always was, Teresa Martinez added, following behind. I've pulled his case history. In 15 years, he's never ruled against a police officer, not once. Agent Coleman's phone rang. She answered, her face growing grave. Dennis Murphy is missing. He was supposed to report for additional testimony this morning, but his safe house is empty. There's blood. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. The Brotherhood had either kidnapped or killed their turncoat member. We need to find him, Coleman said, already moving. If they've taken him, if they're trying to silence him. She was interrupted by commotion outside. The rallies were converging, barricades being pushed aside as the 2 groups confronted each other. Federal agents were moving in, but the situation was spiraling toward violence. This is what they wanted, Malcolm said, watching from his window. Chaos, division. Make it seem like the city is falling apart without their protection racket. His phone rang. Unknown number. Judge Varelli. The voice was weak-pained. It's Murphy. I don't have much time. Where are you? Warehouse. East End. They grabbed me last night. They want me to recant everything, say I lied. They're going to kill me either way. We're coming for you. Stay on the line. The line went dead. Coleman was already mobilizing units, coordinates traced from the cell tower ping. Malcolm wanted to go with them, but Coleman firmly refused. "Your job is here," she said. "Being visible, showing them they haven't won." As federal agents raced toward the East End, Malcolm made a decision. He walked to the courthouse's main entrance despite his security detail's protests and stepped outside. The crowd fell silent, seeing him, the bruise on his face still visible, standing tall in his judicial robes. Harrison stopped mid-sentence, his megaphone lowering. "You want someone to blame?" Malcolm said, his voice carrying without amplification. "Blame me. I'm right here. But know this. I didn't create the Brotherhood. I didn't allow them to terrorize our community for years. I didn't take protection money, or beat innocent people, or frame teenagers for walking home." He walked down the courthouse steps, his security detail frantically trying to keep up. "I asked questions. I demanded truth. And for that, I was assaulted. For that, my home was burned. For that, you're here calling for my removal." He stood between the two crowds now, a solitary figure in black robes. "But I'm still here, still standing, because justice doesn't retreat in the face of violence. Truth doesn't yield to intimidation." Someone from the pro-police crowd shouted, "You destroyed good cops." "No," Malcolm replied, turning toward the voice. "Corruption destroyed them. I just held up a mirror. If they didn't like what they saw, that's not my fault." From the other crowd, Reverend Morrison started clapping. Others joined in, and soon half the plaza was applauding, while the other half stood in angry silence. Harrison tried to regain control. "This is grandstanding. This is testimony." Malcolm interrupted. "You want to talk about good cops? Let's talk about the officers who came forward, who reported the Brotherhood's crimes despite the risk. Let's talk about the federal agents working around the clock to clean up this mess. Let's talk about the difference between law enforcement and criminal enforcement." His phone buzzed. "Coleman. We got Murphy. Alive. 3 Brotherhood members in custody." Malcolm felt relief wash over him but didn't let it show. He had one more thing to say. "Officer Brantley slapped me because he couldn't stand being questioned by someone he saw as beneath him. But here's what he never understood. No one is beneath justice. No one is above the law. And no amount of violence, intimidation, or rallies will change that fundamental truth." He turned and walked back up the courthouse steps, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. As he reached the door, he heard Jamal Thompson's voice ring out, "Justice for Jefferson County." Others picked up the chant, and by the time Malcolm reached his chambers, it had become a roar that even Harrison's megaphone couldn't overcome. Sarah was waiting with updates. "Murphy's in the hospital but stable. He recorded his entire kidnapping on a hidden device. The 3 Brotherhood members who took him are looking at federal kidnapping charges." And Harrison. "The Judicial Ethics Committee is opening an investigation based on his actions today." Malcolm sat heavily in his chair, exhaustion finally catching up with him. His daughter appeared in the doorway, tears in her eyes. "Dad, what you did out there was necessary," he finished. "Sometimes the robe isn't enough. Sometimes you have to remind people that beneath it is a human being who refuses to be moved." As the sun set over Jefferson County, the crowds dispersed, but the impact remained. The image of Judge Malcolm Varelli, standing between 2 angry crowds bearing the bruise of injustice while speaking truth to power, would become iconic. But more importantly, it marked the moment when the Brotherhood's reign truly ended, not with arrests or investigations, but with a single man refusing to yield to their terror. The phone rang again. It was the governor. "Judge Varelli, I wanted to personally inform you that I'm appointing you to lead the Commission on Police Reform for the entire state. Your courage has inspired change beyond Jefferson County." Malcolm looked at his daughter, at the bruise on his face reflected in the window, at the city beyond where people were finally free to walk home without fear. "I accept," he said simply, knowing that the real work was just beginning. The governor's appointment changed everything. Within hours, Malcolm's new role as head of the State Police Reform Commission was national news, and the small courthouse in Jefferson County became ground zero for a transformation that would ripple across America. But with greater power came greater danger, and the Brotherhood's remaining members weren't finished. 3 days after the announcement, Malcolm stood in a conference room at the state capitol facing 27 police chiefs from across the state. Some looked at him with respect, others with barely concealed hostility. The bruise on his face had faded to a faint yellow shadow, but everyone knew the story behind it. "Gentlemen and ladies," Malcolm began, his voice steady despite the tension. "We're here because the system failed in Jefferson County. It failed the citizens, it failed justice, and ultimately it failed the good officers who serve with honor. We're here to ensure it never happens again." Chief Patricia Williams from the state capitol, one of the few black police chiefs in attendance, nodded approvingly. But Chief Thomas Bradley from the rural Hendon County crossed his arms defensively. "With all due respect, Judge Varelli." Bradley set his tone, suggesting anything but respect. "What happened in Jefferson County was an anomaly. You can't paint all departments with the same brush." "Can't I?" Malcolm pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Hendon County 17 excessive force complaints in the past 2 years, all dismissed internally. Sunrise Township 9 civil rights lawsuits settled out of court with sealed records. Riverside District 3 officers under federal investigation for connections to white supremacist groups." He looked up from the papers. "Should I continue?" The room fell silent. Malcolm let the weight of the evidence settle before continuing. "I'm not here to destroy law enforcement. I'm here to save it from itself." The Brotherhood in Jefferson County didn't appear overnight. It grew in darkness, fed by silence, protected by a culture that valued loyalty over law. Every department represented here has the seeds of its own brotherhood. The question is whether we'll water those seeds or root them out. His phone vibrated with an urgent text from Agent Coleman. "Murphy wants to speak with you, says it's critical." After the meeting, Malcolm drove to the federal medical facility where Dennis Murphy was recovering. The former Brotherhood member looked smaller in his hospital bed, his face bearing fresh bruises from his kidnapping, but his eyes held a desperate urgency. "Judge, there's something I didn't tell the FBI," Murphy said, glancing nervously at the door. "The Brotherhood, it goes beyond Jefferson County. We had contacts in other departments, other cities. They're planning something." "Planning what?" "They call it the reckoning. If the reforms go through, if you succeed in changing things, they're going to make the city burn. Make it look like crime is out of control without them. They've been releasing certain criminals, telling them when patrols won't be in certain areas. They want chaos." Malcolm immediately called Coleman, who arrived within minutes with a recording device. Murphy's confession continued for 2 hours, naming names, revealing connections that spread like a cancer through multiple jurisdictions. "There's a meeting tonight," Murphy said finally. "The remaining Brotherhood members and their supporters. They think I'm dead, so they won't be expecting anyone to know. Old warehouse on Pier 47. That evening, as federal agents prepared to raid the warehouse, Malcolm found himself in an unexpected position, sitting in a surveillance van, with Coleman watching through cameras as the operation unfolded. He'd insisted on being present, arguing that as head of the Reform Commission, he needed to see the enemy he was fighting. Through the grainy footage, they watched as 15 men gathered in the warehouse, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes. Malcolm recognized several faces, officers who'd stood behind Morrison at his press conference, including 2 sergeants who were supposed to be on duty. "Listen," Coleman said, adjusting her earpiece to share the audio feed. A voice Malcolm didn't recognize was speaking. "Varelli thinks he's won, but we're going to show this city what happens without us. Tomorrow night, 3 coordinated incidents. Make it look like gang violence. The media will eat it up, and suddenly everyone will be begging for the old ways back." "What about the feds?" another voice asked. "They can't be everywhere. And once the city's burning, once bodies start dropping, nobody's going to care about some reform commission. They'll want order, and we're the only ones who can provide it." Coleman gave the signal and federal agents stormed the warehouse. The operation was swift, professional, everything the Brotherhood hadn't been. Within minutes, all 15 conspirators were in custody. Their planned reckoning stopped before it could begin. But as Malcolm watched them being led away, he noticed something troubling. One of the arrested men was staring directly at a hidden camera, as if he knew exactly where it was. He mouthed words that made Malcolm's blood run cold. "You're too late." The first incident happened an hour later. A fire at a community center in the East End, the same one where Jamal Thompson had worked. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. The second incident followed quickly. A drive-by shooting at a reformed gang member's legitimate business windows, shattered walls riddled with bullets. Malcolm's phone rang. It was Jamal Thompson, panic in his voice. "Judge, they're here. Outside our house. 3 men in masks." "Get away from the windows," Malcolm commanded, already signaling to Coleman. "Federal agents are on the way." The response was immediate, but by the time agents arrived, the masked men had vanished, leaving behind another spray-painted message: "This is just the beginning." "They had a backup plan," Coleman said grimly. "Cells we didn't know about, supporters we haven't identified." Malcolm made a decision that his security detail strongly opposed. He went on live television that night, standing in front of the burned community center, the bruise on his face barely visible, but his resolve clear as ever. "Tonight, criminals hiding behind the memory of the Brotherhood tried to terrorize our community," he said, looking directly into the camera. "They burned a place where children learn where hope grows. They think fear will make us beg for their return, will make us accept corruption as the price of safety. They're wrong." He paused, letting his words sink in. "To those still out there, still clinging to the old ways, hear this: every act of terrorism you commit only proves why reform is necessary. Every attempt at intimidation only strengthens our resolve. You are not protectors. You are the threat we're protecting against." The response was immediate. Citizens began calling in tips reporting suspicious activities, naming names of Brotherhood sympathizers. The community that had been silent for years found its voice, and it was deafening. But in Judge Harrison's home, a different response was forming. The disgraced judge sat with 3 other men, including a state senator and a wealthy businessman who'd profited from the Brotherhood's protection racket. "Varelli has to be stopped," Harrison said, pouring whiskey with a shaking hand. "He's destroying everything we've built." "The legal routes have failed," the senator replied. "The federal investigation is too strong, but there are other ways." "What are you suggesting?" the businessman asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "I'm suggesting that sometimes justice requires methods the law doesn't recognize," Harrison said carefully. "There are people professionals who can make problems disappear." "You're talking about murder," the businessman stated flatly. "I'm talking about survival," Harrison countered. "Varelli isn't just reforming the police, he's dismantling an entire system. Our system. How many of us will be implicated when they start following the money? How many careers, how many lives will be destroyed?" The senator stood abruptly. "I won't be part of this conversation." He left, but not before adding, "But I won't stop it either." Unknown to the conspirators, the businessman was wearing a wire. He'd flipped to the federal investigation 2 days earlier when Coleman had shown him evidence of his tax evasion. Within an hour, Harrison was in custody, charged with conspiracy to commit murder. The arrest of a fellow judge sent shockwaves through the legal community. Malcolm found himself in the surreal position of watching Harrison's arraignment in the same courtroom where Brantley had assaulted him just days before. "Your Honor," Harrison's lawyer argued to the presiding federal judge, "my client was merely venting frustration. There was no actual plan." "Your client was recorded discussing hiring an assassin," the federal prosecutor interrupted. "That's not venting, it's conspiracy." Harrison, in an orange jumpsuit that replaced his judicial robes, looked broken. When his eyes met Malcolm's across the courtroom, there was no longer defiance, only defeat. That night, Malcolm sat with his daughter in their temporary residence, the safe house having become their home while his actual house was being repaired. Jasmine was working on a law review article about the Jefferson County events, her laptop surrounded by legal texts and news clippings. "Dad," she said suddenly, "do you ever regret it? Taking on the Brotherhood, becoming a symbol. Our house was burned. You're living under constant guard. You can't even go to the grocery store anymore." Malcolm considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the system was so broken it took violence in open court to expose it. But regret standing up to them? Never. Even knowing what it cost. Especially knowing what it cost. Because if the price of justice is this high, imagine the cost of injustice. Ask Jamal Thompson. Ask the 47 families who came forward. Ask the next generation, who won't have to fear walking home." His phone rang. It was President Matthews herself. "Judge Varelli." The president's voice was warm but formal. "I've been following the situation in Jefferson County. The nation has been watching your courage, your integrity. I'm calling to inform you that I'm establishing a National Commission on Police Reform, and I want you to co-chair it." Malcolm was speechless for a moment. From a county judge to a national figure in a matter of days, it seemed surreal. "Madam President, I'm honored, but my work here isn't finished. Which is why you'd be perfect for this role. You've shown that reform is possible even in the most entrenched systems. We need that example, that expertise on a national level." After the call ended, Malcolm stood at the window looking out at Jefferson County. Below, he could see federal agents patrolling, keeping watch. The city that had been gripped by the Brotherhood's fear was slowly healing, slowly learning to trust again. Agent Coleman arrived with updates. "We've arrested 6 more Brotherhood affiliates tonight. Murphy's information keeps paying dividends. But Judge, there's something else." She handed him a file. "We've found similar organizations in 12 other cities. They call themselves different names, but the structure is the same. Corrupt officers, protection rackets, systemic abuse. 12 cities. That we know of. Your work here, it's inspired others to come forward. FBI offices nationwide are getting calls, tips, confessions. It's like breaking the dam in Jefferson County released floods everywhere else." The next morning brought the most dramatic revelation yet. Chief Morrison, facing life in prison, had decided to cooperate fully. He sat in an FBI interrogation room, no longer the powerful figure he'd once been, and began naming names that reached to the highest levels of state government. The Brotherhood was just the muscle. Morrison explained, his voice recorded for posterity. The real power came from above. State senators, congressional representatives, even a federal judge. They all benefited from our activities, and in exchange they protected us. Malcolm watched the interrogation through a video link, each revelation, another piece of a puzzle he was only beginning to understand. The Brotherhood hadn't been an aberration. It had been a symptom of something much larger. That afternoon, he stood before the State Police Reform Commission, again this time, with federal backing and presidential authority. The chiefs, who had been dismissive days earlier, now sat in attentive silence. "What we uncovered in Jefferson County is not unique." Malcolm began, his voice carrying the weight of everything he'd learned. "It's a pattern repeated across our nation. Officers who forgot their oath, officials who chose profit over principle, systems designed to protect the corrupt rather than serve the innocent." He pulled up a presentation showing the connections between various Brotherhood-like organizations. "But here's what else we learned. The vast majority of officers are not part of this corruption. They're victims of it, too forced to stay silent or risk their careers, their lives. Reform isn't about punishing all police. It's about liberating the good ones from the tyranny of the bad." Chief Patricia Williams stood up. "Judge Varelli, my department is ready to be the first to implement your reforms. Full transparency, civilian oversight, mandatory de-escalation training, and zero tolerance for corruption." One by one, other chiefs stood, committing their departments to change. Not all, but enough to matter. The tide was turning. But the Brotherhood's death throes weren't over. That night, as Malcolm was being driven to a secure location, a truck rammed their vehicle, sending it spinning off the road. His security detail responded instantly, but in the chaos, masked men attempted to drag Malcolm from the car. "This is for the Brotherhood," one shouted, raising what looked like a weapon. A shot rang out. The attacker fell. Agent Coleman stood there smoking gun in hand, having followed in a backup vehicle. The other attackers fled, but their message had been sent, even with the Brotherhood broken. Its ideology lived on in desperate, dangerous men. Malcolm, shaken but uninjured, looked at the young federal agent who'd saved his life. "Thank you. Just doing my job, Your Honor. But maybe now you'll take our security recommendations more seriously." The attack made national news within minutes. The image of Judge Malcolm Varelli, the man who'd stood firm after being slapped in court, nearly assassinated for his reform efforts, galvanized public opinion like nothing before. Protests erupted in cities across America, all demanding the kind of reform Malcolm was championing. In his hospital room where he was taken for observation, despite being uninjured, Malcolm received a stream of visitors. Jamal Thompson and his mother came first, tears in their eyes. "They tried to kill you because of us," Denise said, guilt heavy in her voice. "No," Malcolm corrected firmly. "They tried to kill me because I threatened their power. This was never just about one case, one family. This was about whether we'll accept corruption as the price of order." Reverend Morrison arrived next, leading a prayer circle in the hospital corridor. Then came Dorothy Chen and Teresa Martinez, his fellow judges, who'd supported him from the beginning. "The state Supreme Court is fast-tracking all the Brotherhood cases," Dorothy informed him. "Every conviction obtained through their corrupted arrests is being reviewed. It's going to mean hundreds, maybe thousands of overturned convictions." "Good," Malcolm said simply. "Justice delayed is justice denied, but late justice is better than no justice." That evening, as Malcolm prepared to leave the hospital, Dennis Murphy was wheeled in for one final conversation. The former Brotherhood member was being relocated to witness protection, his testimony too valuable to risk. "Judge B," Murphy said, his voice heavy with regret. "I wanted to apologize, not just for what I did, but for what I didn't do. All those years knowing what Brantley and the others were doing, staying silent. I was a coward." "You were trapped in a system that punished integrity and rewarded corruption," Malcolm replied. "But when it mattered most, you chose courage. That's what counts." "Will it ever be enough to make up for what we did?" Malcolm thought about the question. "Redemption isn't a destination, Officer Murphy. It's a journey. Every truth you tell, every victim who gets justice because of your testimony, that's a step on that journey." As Murphy was wheeled away, Malcolm realized that the same could be said for Jefferson County, for the entire system they were trying to reform. It wasn't about reaching perfection. It was about the constant effort to be better, to choose justice over convenience, truth over comfort. The next morning, Malcolm stood in the rebuilt community center, surrounded by the families who'd been the Brotherhood's victims. The bruise on his face was completely gone now, but the mark the Brotherhood had left on Jefferson County would take much longer to heal. "We gather here not to celebrate victory," Malcolm said to the assembled crowd, "because the work isn't done. We gather to commit ourselves to the long, hard task of rebuilding trust, reforming systems, and ensuring that what happened here never happens again." Young Jamal Thompson stepped forward, holding a plaque. "Judge Varelli, the community wanted to give you this." Malcolm read the inscription, "To the Honorable Malcolm Varelli, who stood when others would have fallen, who spoke when others were silent, who showed us that justice isn't just a word, it's an action." As applause filled the room, Malcolm thought about Travis Brantley sitting in federal prison awaiting trial for assault, civil rights violations, and racketeering. He thought about Harrison facing conspiracy charges. He thought about Morrison cooperating with federal authorities to reduce his sentence. The Brotherhood was broken, its members scattered, imprisoned, or in hiding. But he also thought about the future, about the young people in this room who would grow up in a Jefferson County where walking while black wasn't a crime, where police served rather than terrorized, where justice was more than just a promise. His phone buzzed with a message from the president. "Watching your speech. The nation needs more judges like you. Consider this an unofficial inquiry about your interest in a federal judgeship." Malcolm put the phone away without responding. There would be time for such decisions later. Right now, he was exactly where he needed to be, standing with his community bearing witness to both the pain of the past and the promise of the future. As the ceremony ended and people began to disperse, an elderly black woman approached him. She was bent with age, walked with a cane, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Judge Varelli," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "I'm Emma Watson. My grandson was killed by the Brotherhood 10 years ago. They said he resisted arrest, but he was shot in the back. No one would listen to me then." Malcolm took her hands gently. "I'm listening now, Mrs. Watson. I know you are. That's why I'm here. Not for justice for my grandson, he's gone, but for hope that his death wasn't in vain, that it's part of what brought us to this moment." As she walked away, Malcolm realized that she was right. Every victim of the Brotherhood, every family terrorized, every community member who'd lived in fear, they had all contributed to this moment. The slap that had shocked the nation was just the visible climax of years of invisible suffering. The sun was setting over Jefferson County as Malcolm finally left the community center. His security detail surrounded him, but for the first time since the assault, he didn't feel like a target. He felt like what he'd always tried to be: a servant of justice, a voice for the voiceless, a judge who refused to look away from hard truths. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The National Commission would convene. Other cities would begin their own reckonings with their own brotherhoods. The work of reform would continue, slow and difficult and essential. But tonight, as Malcolm Varelli stood in the doorway of the rebuilt community center watching children play in the same space the Brotherhood had tried to burn, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Not pride, there was too much work left for pride. But satisfaction that when the moment came, when history demanded someone stand up to corruption, he hadn't flinched. The sound of Brantley's slap still echoed in his memory, but it no longer meant what Brantley had intended. It had become the sound of a system breaking, of truth prevailing, of justice refusing to be silenced. And in courtrooms across America, that echo was growing louder, inspiring other judges, other communities, other victims to stand up and demand better. The Brotherhood was dead, but what it had inadvertently given birth to, a movement for justice that would reshape American policing, was very much alive.